Okay, go ahead and proceed. Thank you.
Okay, so I need to share my screen. Let me pull that up real quick. Okay, so we'll get started here. And like Rita said, I'm Tamara Walker. I am a former nurse. I am now a doula and childbirth educator, and I am going to help you to kind of separate fact from fiction when it comes to your perinatal journey. So we're going to debunk some common pregnancy and birth myths today. And we'll be talking about several of those as we go along. And I have done labor support even before I became a professional doula, became certified as a doula and childbirth educator about almost 3.5 years ago, a little over almost 3.5, yes. And but I've been providing labor support for family members and friends for over 30 years and had been in on births as a nurse as well. Although my primary focus as a registered nurse was in pediatrics and PICU. But I did sometimes get pulled to labor and delivery and was in on many births as a nurse, as well as just like I said, being with family members and friends. And so I have a passion for birth and pregnancy and helping people to learn all they can so that they can have the absolute best experiences possible. And I am the owner of Mom RN Birth Services. So, mom, because I'm a mom of two, and RN because I'm a former RN. And I had a business for many years called Mom RN. And so, when I became a doula and childbirth educator and started that business, I kind of transitioned, used that name. And now I'm also a grandmother of two. And so, I have lots of experience with pregnancy and then supporting people in their pregnancies. And I believe very, very strongly that evidence based birth education can make all of the difference for your birth experience and to help you to have the kind of birth experience that you want. And what that looks like is going to be different for everybody. And so part of what we're going to do today is while we're talking about debunking these myths is I really want you to think about what is right for you. And if you have questions about that, then we're going to talk about, finding trustworthy resources, but also always talking with your care provider about your own circumstances and what is best for your health and your baby's health, because it's not a one size fit all. When we give any kind of birthing education, birthing advice, you have to kind of take what works best for you and what resonates with you and what is best for your situation and your health. So we'll talk about that as we go along today. So is it fact or is it just a myth? Checking your sources. Like I said, pregnancy is a time that it's so exciting. We're filled with all this anticipation, but it can be overwhelming due to just the sheer volume of advice that people give us, whether it's family members or friends or colleagues, whether it's on the internet, on television, or you read it in a book or read it in a magazine, saw it in a documentary. There's just all this information that comes at us. And sometimes it can be very difficult to discern what should I pay attention to? What advice should I follow? And sometimes it's conflicting, isn't it? Sometimes we're dealing with, well, this doctor said this, but this nurse said that, or this research said this, and that said that. And it just gets confusing sometimes. And so, again, it's always important to look for trustworthy resources, and I will share some of those today, and recognize which ones are just myths, what is fact, and what may just be an old wives' tale. And you can just, the things that you can just ignore that aren't from trustworthy sources. So we're going to dive into our first myth for today. and that is I'm pregnant, so I'm eating for two. And a lot of times women think that they need to eat a lot more than they normally would when they're pregnant in order to grow baby, and sometimes can go overboard with that. Or they use the excuse, I'm pregnant, so therefore I can eat as much as I want of anything I want because, I need to eat more. Well, the truth is, here's the facts. Most people only need about 300 additional calories per day than when they're not pregnant. And mainly that's in the second and third trimesters. So you really actually don't need a whole lot more. You need a little bit more. And ideally, healthy options and foods, whole foods, trying to cut out some of those processed foods, um, are going to be what's most beneficial for your health and for your baby's health. But you really don't need to go overboard and eat a lot more or twice as much because, uh, yeah, you are eating for two, but that baby for the majority of your pregnancy is itty bitty tiny and doesn't need a whole huge adult sized diet, if that makes sense. So talk with your healthcare provider if you have questions about how much you should be eating, and about how much weight is right for you to gain during your pregnancy. The kind of standard recommendation is typically between 25 to 35 pounds. But again, that's not a one size fits all. And so it's always important to check with your care provider on what is going to be a healthy amount for me to gain during the course of my pregnancy, and go with their advice. And our second myth is you can't sleep on your right side. Now, I'm curious and if anybody has been told this by their care provider or by someone else that they know. And this one kind of gets some confusion because if you're a side sleeper, sometimes it's really hard, especially if you are more dominant to sleep on your right side. It can be really hard to train yourself to sleep on the left, and you might be uncomfortable, or you might think, oh, I have to sleep on my left side all night long. So this is actually a myth, although it has a little grain of truth. Of the facts are you shouldn't sleep on your back, especially as your pregnancy progresses. If you are a back sleeper, it's important to start kind of training yourself during your pregnancy to sleep on your side. However, side sleeping on either side is generally safe for most people during your pregnancy. One caveat would be is if you have any blood pressure issues, then it would be ideal and probably more beneficial to be sleeping on your left side versus your right side. And the reason for that is the major blood vessel that's running through your body and helping to nourish the placenta for your baby can be impacted more and restricted more if you're sleeping on your right side versus your left side. If you're sleeping on your left side, it gets a little bit better flow for most people. But again, if you don't have any issues with your blood pressure, and if your doctor has not told you that you can only sleep on one side, then it should not be an issue. And research studies have shown that it should be generally safe for most people to sleep on either side. Again, just try not to sleep on your back, especially as baby's growing, which as baby grows and you get further in your pregnancy, that becomes more uncomfortable to even try to sleep on your back. But if you are trying to sleep on your back, that can really impede that blood flow. And so we really do not encourage that. We discourage back sleeping during pregnancy. And myth number 3 is labor is always excruciating. And I am sure that you have heard many stories of friends or family members, or maybe you've read stories or seen on social media the horror stories of somebody's labor. But I'm here to tell you that yes, labor can be very physically demanding. It can be challenging. It is a journey, but it does not have to be absolutely excruciating, and it is not something that you need to fear or have anxiety about. Instead, the facts are the better that you prepare yourself, the easier you're going to make it on yourself. And preparation is key. So having good childbirth education so that you know what to expect, what is normal, what is not normal, what are variations of normal, how to cope with contractions through various comfort measures and comfort techniques and relaxation techniques. Being informed of things that you can expect at your birthplace, whether you're giving birth in a hospital or at home or a birth center, knowing what to expect takes away the anxiety and the fear of the unknown. And that, in and of itself, can make labor much easier to deal with than if you just decide, I'm going to wing it. Or I don't want to know, it's too scary for me. It'll make me more anxious if I learn anything about it. I'm just going to go in and just, whatever my healthcare provider tells me, then, I'm going to let them run the show. Unfortunately, sometimes that backfires, and you end up, women sometimes end up having a negative experience when maybe they could have had a better experience had they prepared themselves ahead of time. So knowing your options, practicing those comfort techniques and relaxation techniques so that you've already got those skills, which those are actually like relaxation techniques. That's a life skill that you can carry forward way after you've had baby. But practicing those before you ever get into labor is going to make your labor easier. Whatever happens in labor, you'll at least have those skills and those ways to help yourself. And then also building a strong support team is so important. So if you've got a partner, husband, boyfriend, whoever's going to be there for you, or if you've got friends or family members, or if you've hired a doula, which I highly recommend, being a doula myself, you will have a support team that can help you and encourage you during labor, give you comfort during labor, and make your labor a lot easier for you to manage and deal with. So labor absolutely does not have to be excruciating. That is a myth. And the facts are you can have a much better labor when you have the knowledge and when you have the education and the support, and when you've put those into practice ahead of time and prepared yourself physically and mentally and emotionally. I always also encourage preparing yourself physically with exercise, and we're going to talk about that in just a few moments too. Any questions so far before we go on to the next? I'm not able to see, I'm not able to see the chat with my screen being shared.
Okay.
So
We do have one question. Shannon, she wanted to know, as far as sleeping on your back, right? Sleeping, is
yes,
back sleeping bad in the first trimester or only second and third?
So it's not necessarily bad in the first trimester, but we still discourage it just because, again, blood flow is not quite as good when you're sleeping on the back. However, it's something to definitely ask your care provider about if you're concerned. But definitely as baby grows and second and third trimester, it's going to make more of an impact because the weight of baby and the weight of the uterus as it's growing with baby to accommodate baby, all of that is going to kind of impact that blood circulation. So I encourage trying to, train yourself even in the first trimester to go, if you're a back sleeper and that's just your natural position that you typically sleep in, maybe get a pillow to prop behind your back so that you can sleep on your side. But if you try to turn over during the night, it kind of, stops you from just rolling onto your back easily and could be a reminder for you to, maybe switch to your other side versus your back. So I hope that that answers your question. Were there any other questions, Rita?
No, not in the chat. If anyone has a question, you want to unmute your mic or you can put in the chat. If not, then you can go ahead and proceed.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
So myth number 4, C-sections are the easy way out. And I don't know how much of the general public has this attitude, but I know I've come across a few people who either just wanted a C-section because they thought, oh, I would rather go through that than to go through labor and birth, or vice versa, somebody stating, well, C-sections are the easy way out, to a mom who maybe needed to have a C-section or had one or was going to be having one. And in any case, that's not the facts. It's a myth. Here are the facts. So a C-section or a cesarean birth is actually a major abdominal surgery. They're having to cut through 7 layers to get to baby. And that's going to take a lot more time to recuperate and heal from versus a vaginal birth. Now, thankfully, we have that option when it's needed and necessary. That's absolutely it can be a life-saving surgery. And sometimes it's necessary for health reasons for mom or for baby or for both. So it's not a bad thing. It's just a different form of birth. And it is something that we need to be mindful that no, it's not easier. And in a lot of cases, mom has already gone through hours of labor before even having the C-section, unless it was a scheduled and planned cesarean before she ever went into labor. Most times when a C-section is necessary, it's because mom's already been in labor for a long period of time. And for whatever reason, maybe mom or baby or both are starting to go into distress. And it would be safer to do a C-section versus letting labor continue for a vaginal birth. And so it's a surgery that has to be recovered from. And it does take a little bit longer for recovery versus a vaginal birth. So myth number 5, and this is kind of a fun one, is you can tell the baby's gender by the shape of mom's belly. Or some people say you can tell the baby's gender by their heart rate or their heartbeat. And any other number of old wives' tales of, oh, you can tell the baby's gender by this, that, or the other. Like I've heard several different methods. And while sometimes these are right, Like everybody's got that one aunt or relative who, oh, she's been right about every single baby. She has guessed it and she called it and knew what it was before everybody else. Uh, but, you figure you've got a 50-50 chance of being right. And a lot of times this is just more of a guess. Now there can sometimes be a little bit of kernel of truth. Sometimes there does seem to be uh, a little bit of difference in how a mom may carry a boy versus a girl. But that's not always the case, and it's not always an accurate kind of measure. There's no scientific basis for these methods. They're just kind of anecdotal, we're guessing. And more reliable methods for actually knowing what the baby's gender will be is, of course, an ultrasound. That's the most common one that most parents, if they want to know, then they go get an ultrasound to find out. And then, of course, genetic testing such as amniocentesis or non-invasive perinatal, prenatal testing, sorry. So scientific tests can actually be accurate and tell you, although ultrasounds are not always 100% foolproof on telling the gender. For instance, my husband has a cousin who was told her entire pregnancy she was having a girl and ended up having a boy. And that's not very uncommon. It happens. And so you can't always 100% rely on the ultrasound, but it is usually fairly accurate. So again, somebody may claim to have their methods of trying to figure out what your baby is, but they have a 50-50 chance of being right or wrong. And they may get it, they may not. So myth number 6 is you shouldn't exercise when you're pregnant. Anybody ever heard this or been told this? Curious. Yeah. So this is actually not true. The facts are that exercise can be very beneficial during pregnancy, and we encourage it's something that if you're doing pregnancy safe exercises and your care provider has not given you any restrictions on those exercises, then it's generally safe and very beneficial for moms to have some sort of exercise routine or exercise regimen in order to help them stay healthy, and it helps prepare their body for labor. Has anybody ever heard the saying that labor and giving birth is like running a marathon? So there is a doctor, and I do not recall his name at the moment, forgive me, but there is a doctor who likened it to running a marathon. And in many ways, it can be, because your body has to meet this very physical demand of going through the process of labor and giving birth to this baby. And sometimes that can take many, many hours. And it uses a lot of physical energy, as well as you need stamina and endurance to keep going. And when you have an exercise routine preparing for a baby, that helps your body to be healthier, helps you have more flexibility, helps you have more strength, helps you have more endurance and stamina. And that can make a really big difference in your labor and how you labor, and can make it easier for you. So I always, again, recommend talking with your care provider if you have any concerns about whether or not certain exercises are right for you. And of course, pregnancy is not the time to start any kind of really intense physical exercise program. There are some exercises that aren't generally considered safe or recommended during pregnancy. So things that are very, very high intensity or involve a lot of risk, we need to try to avoid. But there are a lot of pregnancy safe exercises out there. And there's even pregnancy fitness classes that you may be able to find in your area. I know the classes that I teach through Birth Boot Camp, we have some pregnancy safe exercises taught by a specialist in that area. And we incorporate those in some of our classes so that the moms who are taking our classes get to the benefit of learning those exercises and being able to do those throughout their pregnancy. So again, exercise is very beneficial for most people, and I highly recommend it. Any questions so far?
If you have questions, you can drop them in the chat. Right now, there's no questions at this time.
Okay, thank you. So here's another interesting myth, and it's that heartburn means that your baby will have a lot of hair. So I'm curious if anybody's experienced any heartburn during pregnancy, and if you've already had your baby, did your baby have a lot of hair or not? Is there anyone that's dealt with that issue and maybe you've already had your baby? No. Okay.
Not for myself,
Uh,
no.
So some women have a lot of heartburn during pregnancy, and some don't. Those are the fortunate ones because it's actually more common than not to deal with that issue. And the facts are there may be a loose correlation between the hormones that could possibly indicate baby may have more hair, but that's not a scientific, accurate kind of evidence-based predictor. So we really just cannot determine if baby's going to have a lot of hair just based on how much heartburn a mom has while she's pregnant. Um, I had some heartburn off and on with mine, and my babies did not have a whole lot of hair. They weren't bald, but they didn't, they just had a small amount of hair. They didn't have tons of hair. I've also, had friends who had tons of heartburn and their babies came out bald and vice versa. So you just can't rely on that. It's fun to wonder. And sometimes in ultrasounds later on in pregnancy, sometimes you can see if baby's got a lot of hair. Not always though, but sometimes it'll show up. But that's a better predictor than just whether you have heartburn or not, because the heartburn really doesn't have a lot to do with it. But again, there's some indication that there might be a loose correlation between the hormones that are being released at that time. So myth number 8 is you can't have any caffeine when you're pregnant. Now, if you are somebody like me who lives by their caffeine, when I became pregnant for the first time, I had just graduated nursing school. I had just started my first job in nursing, and I was newly married, fresh out of college, and I had to have my caffeine. I was working the night shift, and the only way I could function was to have my caffeine. And then I got pregnant unexpectedly. My husband and I were pretty newly married. We'd been married less than a year. And I found myself pregnant. And at that time, they were like, don't drink any caffeine. I was like, I'm going to die without my caffeine. I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I'm working night shift at a new job. I was studying for the state board exams, and I just thought, there's no way. There's just no way. Fortunately, studies have shown that actually a moderate amount of caffeine is considered safe for most people during pregnancy, and a moderate amount meaning up to 200 milligrams a day. So, what that looks like is if you're a coffee drinker, up to 12 ounces of coffee a day. But you also want to be very mindful of other things that contain caffeine. So if you are a soda drinker and you drink sodas with caffeine, you want to be mindful of and check the caffeine content and minimize your intake so that you're kind of staying under that 200 milligram limit. But also chocolate and other things can have caffeine. So being mindful again and just kind of trying to limit your intake, but you don't have to completely cut it out if it's something that you enjoy. And as long as your healthcare provider has not told you no caffeine. Yeah, because again, this is not a one size fits all. And if you have any kind of health conditions or a baby has any reason why the doctor would be hesitant to allow caffeine, you need to listen to your care provider. So again, it's a myth that you cannot have caffeine at all during your pregnancy. Any questions so far?
No questions so far, but as far as with, coffee and caffeinated coffee, I know I personally stopped drinking it and I switched to decaf and it's been hard
Oh,
to get
yes.
back. Yeah, I just got so used to decaf coffee just to have that taste. But
Uh-huh.
uh thanks for clearing that up.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah. So I was not even a coffee drinker back then. I was only drinking soda.
Okay.
And I didn't even become a coffee drinker until about maybe, 12 or 13 years ago. And yeah, but I know it was I just thought I was not going to survive without my caffeine when I got pregnant. So I was very grateful when I was able to talk with my midwife, and she said, you can have a little bit. So I would allow myself one cup of soda a night while I
Oh,
was at work, just to keep me going.
gotcha.
So, yeah. So we've talked about several myths, and I know that there's many more out there. But how do we figure out what sources we can trust versus what may not be so reliable and trustworthy? So I know that there are tons of websites, there's lots of experts out there, and a lot of social media, TikTok influencers, Instagram influencers, you name it, who are giving advice about pregnancy. And that's all well and good. But again, like I said earlier, you just have to be very careful about what they're telling you and check their sources. And if there's something that someone is telling you that just you're not sure about or you want more information about, I encourage you to educate yourself, look it up, don't just take their word for it, and talk with your care provider for clarification as well. Because there's been some great influencers that I've seen on social media. Jen Hamilton's one of them that comes to mind. She's real popular on TikTok and she's a labor and delivery nurse. There's Labor Mommy. There's a few others that I've watched some of their videos and feel like they are speaking with expertise and authority, and they know what they're talking about, and that their intention is for good, and that they are trying to give solid information. And then there's others that I've seen who I had to question or flat out was like, no, what they're teaching is wrong. And so you really have to be careful of what people are telling you when it comes to your health and your baby's health. And so finding those reliable and trustworthy resources is important. So these are some of the ones that I recommend. These are some of the sources, not all, but some of the sources that I go to whenever I have questions about something or I want to learn more. So the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, they have comprehensive information on their website about pregnancy, all the way from trying to conceive to postpartum care. And they have researched information on there. Also, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the nickname for that is ACOG, or the acronym is. ACOG offers expert advice and medical guidelines and personal stories as well on their website. So they are a great wealth of information. And then Evidenced Birth is a website that has medical professionals who have backed the resources that are provided on there, and they're providing evidenced information. And they have tons of articles and I believe there's videos on there. There's just a huge resource of information that is all evidence-based. And I believe firmly, like I stated at the beginning of this, that evidence-based childbirth education is critical, and it will make a huge difference for your pregnancy and for your labor and birth experience. So I encourage you to get educated, take childbirth education classes, and learn from trustworthy resources so that you can have the best experience for you and for your baby, and so that it will help you to stay as healthy and low risk as possible and manage anything during your pregnancy and birth and postpartum. So in addition to these, there's also Baby Center is a good resource. And there's lots of others out there as well. So check your sources. Just because somebody says that they're an expert does not always mean that they really truly know what they're talking about. So, like I said in earlier with all of these myths, talk with your care provider, do your research. You don't have to just take my word for it, and you don't have to just take some other expert on the internet's advice. Do your research as well, do your homework, talk with your care provider, and that way you feel comfortable that you've got the right information and can make the choices and decisions for you that's going to be best for you and for your baby. I also encourage you to use your brain. And this is an acronym that is something that we teach in our classes, the childbirth classes that I teach. We added an additional N to the end of the word brain. And what using your brain to decide what's right for you looks like is B, asking what are the benefits. So when I'm teaching this in a childbirth class, we're typically talking about interventions that maybe the doctor is proposing, or things that may come up during labor or during pregnancy that they're suggesting when, they say we need to do this test or this procedure, or mom's been in labor a long time, maybe doctor is suggesting maybe we need to do a C-section. But you can also tailor this and use it for, okay, I was told this thing that might be a myth, might be fact. How do I know? I'm going to look it up and research it. What you want to know is, what are the benefits? So let's go back to exercise, the myth about you shouldn't exercise during pregnancy. Well, what are the benefits of doing exercise in pregnancy? What are the benefits of not doing exercise during pregnancy? Find those out and then that'll help you make a decision. What are the risks? The R stands for risks. Are there any risks? So with exercise in specific, for low impact pregnancy safe exercises, for most people, that's going to be very, very low risk. But there may be risks for doing any kind of high intensity exercises. Or if you have high blood pressure or any kind of health condition that possibly could have a risk if you're doing exercise, then you need to be aware, okay, there might be some risk involved. So finding out what are the benefits, what are the risks, and then the A is what's the alternative. So I'm being given this advice, but what are the alternatives to that? And learning what those are so that you can choose what's right for you. I is trusting your intuition. What does your intuition or your instincts tell you? Is your intuition telling you, yeah, I'm not buying this, I think that's just a myth? Or is it telling you, okay, that makes sense, that I understand how that could be true, and or what, what the facts are about that? And then N is, what if I do nothing? What if I don't follow this advice, whatever it may be? And then the second N that we added on is what happens next. So what if I follow this advice? Then what happens? What comes after that? So using your brain to help you decide what is right for you can be helpful when you're discerning between what is myth and what is fact. And then, do I want to follow that advice or not? Any questions on resources or on using your brain?
Not on that part of it, but we do have a couple
Okay.
questions. So whenever
Oh,
you,
awesome. Okay.
okay. So the first question is, well, Danielle said she would ask afterwards. She wanted to know about, I guess you're going to do like a quick recap. She missed the first three myths. So
Okay.
towards the end. And then Shannon asked, what is the best way to find the right OBGYN for you? Is it normal to see a few before you settle in on one?
Okay. So I can do a quick recap in just a few minutes. To answer that question, we'll quickly, hit those again. And then for finding the right OB, that really comes down to a number of factors. So I always encourage people to check with your insurance to see what doctors are covered in your area, and then reach out and try to get recommendations from people either that that maybe have used an OB, or I see in Facebook moms groups all the time, I see requests for OB recommendations, and those always get tons of comments. So it's very possible that you could ask, and you can, in a lot of groups, you can even ask anonymously if you're not wanting to let everybody know that you're pregnant or that you're looking for an OB. That can be a way. Also, looking up reviews online, seeing if you're considering, here's the list of doctors that your insurance covers. Look them up online, see how they're reviewed. And then it is possible with some, to set up just a consultation visit to see if they're a good fit for you. So that would look like calling their office and finding that out, if you could schedule just a consultation to see if they're the right provider for you. It's really, really important to find a provider that aligns with what your goals are and what you're wanting during your pregnancy. So for example, if you are wanting to do a unmedicated or natural childbirth, you wouldn't necessarily want to go to an OB who thinks that every single time a woman should have an epidural when she's in labor and pushes for that, because that wouldn't be the right fit for you. Um, So that's just one example of just trying to find who aligns with you, and then also who is in network for your insurance and the place where you want to give birth. I hope that answered your question and helped. Okay, so Q&A time. I will do a quick recap before we do any more questions because that was asked for. So those first three myths, I believe she said she missed. Myth number one was eating for two. And that's actually a myth. You are eating for two technically, but you're not eating double, or you don't need double of what you would normally eat. You really only need, most people generally need about 300 extra calories per day when you're pregnant. And mainly that's in the second and third trimesters. And so I always recommend talking with your care provider about what is right for your situation and what they recommend for where you're starting at and how your health is already for what is a good, healthy weight range for you to gain during your pregnancy. But you don't need to double the amount of food that you're eating each day. And then myth number two is you cannot sleep on your right side. And so that is a myth. However, we do encourage that if you have any blood pressure issues or circulation issues or any health reasons that your doctor has told you, you can only sleep on your left side. But everybody else, it's generally considered safe to sleep on either side. We highly discourage, though, sleeping on the back. And then our third myth was labor is always excruciating. And that does not have to be the case. It absolutely does not have to be excruciating. And I encourage you to prepare with childbirth education classes, learning comfort techniques, relaxation techniques, knowing what to expect in labor, and then surrounding yourself with a good, solid support team who's going to support you in labor, whether that's a husband, partner, boyfriend, whether it's a family member or a friend, whether you hire a doula. Having a good, solid birth support team that's going to help you is going to make your labor easier to manage, and especially preparing ahead of time, preparing your body and preparation physically, mentally, and emotionally is going to help your labor go much easier, and it does not have to be excruciating. But that fear of the unknown, when you don't know what to expect and you haven't educated yourself and you haven't learned what to do in labor and what's normal, what's not normal, and ways to cope with labor, that can make labor a lot harder to deal with. And that fear of the unknown can intensify labor and make it something that's scary when it doesn't have to be. It absolutely does not have to be. So I hope that that answered your question. And if we have any other questions, please feel free to ask them. I'm curious, what's the weirdest pregnancy or birth myth that you have ever heard? I would love to hear those.
I think Danielle may have a question, and then we can chime in and answer your question.
Okay.
Go ahead, Danielle. I know you said you had a question, so if you wanted to ask at this.
Yes, I did. It's actually I'm 34. I'm from the
Yes.
UK. The resources you was talking about, like the medical evidence base. Would you suggest that I follow the local UK guidance, or is that also universal? The ones that you suggested online.
Well, some of it's universal, but I'm sure that the UK has some great resources as well. So you may just need to do some search or talk with your care provider about what resources they recommend, because some of the recommendations are going to be the same, but some might be a little different, just because we're in different countries. And so I encourage you, I know that there's got to be some great, in fact, I've come across them in some of my studies for researching different things. There are some great resources. I just don't have the names of those handy at the moment. But I'm sure that your care provider or just a really good internet search can help bring up. Look for evidence-based, medically researched studies, information that's coming from things that have actually been researched and studied versus just anecdotal.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. I also have
You're
another
welcome.
question.
Yes.
Yes. You know the myth about number one, eating for two and the extra 300 calories. I personally feel like I'm overweight anyway, and I was trying to lose weight prior to this whole unexpected pregnancy. Can I still lose weight and focus on my weight goals whilst going through this whole process, or is that not advised? If that makes sense.
So it's generally not advised. We typically do not advise women to try to lose any weight during pregnancy. However, again, I always go back to talking with your care provider to see what is right for you, because each of us have our own medical needs and health needs. And so your care provider would be the best to find out or help you determine what a healthy amount of weight gain for your pregnancy would be. But then also, if there were some reason that losing weight would be more beneficial for you, they can discuss that with you and figure out, a plan to help you with that. But generally, overall, it's discouraged to try to lose weight during pregnancy, because restricting calories is going to, restrict calories from baby as well, unless we're eating like just an overabundance and way more than what's needed.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, I'm 34. This is my first pregnancy. So, they say when you're 35, what's the word? Geriatric? Am I saying it right?
Geriatric, yes.
Yeah, that's the word. Sorry. Is that a myth, or would you say that's I need to be careful because it's my first time and I just got to take it more easier than others that are much younger than me? Would you suggest?
So with being what we call advanced maternal age or geriatric pregnancy, which I hate that term, because geriatric typically, at least in our country, means, like a senior citizen or elderly. And so, I like to use advanced maternal age, but it is just puts a little higher risk for some things. So doctors typically will kind of monitor for any potential of being higher risk, but it doesn't necessarily mean, as long as you're healthy to begin with, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have issues or complications. But talking with your care provider about what that looks like for you is important. We do know that there are, like I said, some increased risks the older that we get, that when we're pregnant, but we can do things to help ourselves stay lower risk or get healthy, stay healthy. Some of those things would be eating a whole foods diet versus a lot of processed food, doing pregnancy safe exercises and things of that nature to try to lower the risks.
Lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate your questions. Okay, so Rita, I know that we're about out of time. Did you have anything that you needed to add?
Well, if anyone wants to answer the question, what's the weirdest pregnancy or birth myth you've ever heard? And I know, just like what Danielle said, having a baby older, I had mine at 35, and I know it was like, oh, no, you're gonna have health issues and all kind of stuff. But I truly had a blessed pregnancy. So it definitely no complications or anything like that. And it was a vaginal birth. So I'm just thankful. One myth I've heard, I wanted to ask you, I know someone had told me, they say, look, when you go into the delivery room, whatever you do, you want to hold back from screaming because every time you scream, it pulls the baby back up.
Oh, goodness. Oh, wow.
They
Okay.
said, you shouldn't scream. So I was like, okay.
Oh, no. Yeah. So it does like it. I think there's a kernel of truth in it doesn't pull baby back up, but if we're screaming really high pitched,
Okay.
that does tend to tighten everything up
Yes.
because you have to tighten your throat in order to scream really high pitched or make high pitched noises.
Okay.
And if we tighten up our throat, then there's some correlation to tightening everything up.
Okay.
And that could make things progress a little slower. So in my classes that I teach, we actually encourage women to make low sounds,
Okay.
like kind of, moaning sound or really low sounds that with a relaxed throat. And, and sometimes, making noises during labor can be helpful simply because sometimes that's a way of just coping with what you're going through and getting through it. And so we encourage really low sounds versus high pitched.
No screaming.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Anyone else have any questions at this time? Feel free to unmute your mic and you can ask Miss Tamara any questions. Not, we'll be wrapping it up. And like I said, we have these seminars twice a month. So definitely go to our Eventbrite page. You can register for any upcoming seminar. If you have not applied for the Mommy Care Kit, there is the link. I've also dropped it in the chat as well. You can go over to mommycarekits.com/momrn. And then I will drop Tamara's website link in the chat as well. And you can go to her website.
Thank you.
Here we go, right there. So you
They
just
can scan the QR code if they want to do that or use the link.
You use the link either way. So any final remarks or anything like that, Tamara, before we end this call?
I just want to thank you again for having me on. I always enjoy it. I love getting to talk with everybody, and I hope the information is helpful for you. And congratulations to everyone who's pregnant. And this is such an exciting and wonderful time. And I just wish you all the best.
Yeah. All right. Well, ladies, mommies, we thank you for joining us again. And like I said, just definitely go to our Eventbrite page. We've got a lot of good upcoming seminars that we're going to be putting on. If you have not seen our past seminars, you can definitely go to our YouTube channel, and I'll drop that link in the chat. And then I'll send you a recap with our YouTube channel and other information as well. So I'll get that over to you too. And I think that's going to be it. So I wish everyone, I hope you guys have a great remainder of your week. If you need anything for the Mommy Care Kit, definitely reach out to us. And thank you again, Tamara. You have a great one. I appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you so much.
All right. Have a good one, everyone.
Great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.